Want the reward? Do the damn work. Challenge yourself. Inspire change. Choice, not luck. Today's guest, Shane Ramer, host of That Sober Guy podcast. His podcast has reached over 2 million listeners. And if you head over to his website, thatsoberguy.com, you can check out his online community, his free beginner's guide to sobriety called Jumpstart Your Life Without Alcohol in 10 Days, and his Quit Drinking in 30 Days challenge. Okay, everybody, Todd Crandall from Racing for Recovery, and I have my good buddy on here. I can call you that, right?
Absolutely,
yeah.
Man. You're the man, Todd.
This is Shane from That Sober Guy. I was fortunate enough to be on your podcast a while back. That's how we met. What have you been doing since we talked last? Let's start with that.
Oh, man. Well, probably first and foremost, I'm kind of a glorified Uber driver these days because I'm driving my kids around everywhere to soccer practice and school and events and skate parks and all over the place, man. So my wife and I joke about that often, but man, they're growing up quick. And so I'm really trying to stay present with them. They're 10 and 14, and my daughter just started high school. You know, my son's in 5th grade. And so, you know, being a dad, to answer your question, being a dad, being a husband, you know, that's, and being a man who loves God and trying to strengthen my faith is probably, those are the 3 most important things, I think, to me. And then fitness and health and sobriety, obviously, right with those. So that takes up a lot of time, and it's fun, and just trying to do my best at it. Good days and bad days, ups and downs, all that good stuff. And then as far as Sober Guy goes, man, you know, I'm staying super busy with that, busy in a good sense of just podcasts and coaching, group coaching, one-on-one coaching. We have our workshops, we have our Sober Guy men's community, and I'm about to launch our new Sober Guy Victory Council, which is pretty cool. So excited about that in the next couple of months. So all kinds of cool stuff happening, and I really appreciate you having me on today, man. It's great to be here.
Oh, this will be fun. On a comedy standpoint, are you making any money off of those kids? You're charging them to drive them around, or what? You know,
man, I got to start. I tell them both. You guys get a job yet? Like, what's going on here, man? Oh, we're too young, Dad. They're little entrepreneurs though too. They have that entrepreneurial spirit, and you know, they were homeschooled. My wife homeschooled them for about 5 years. They just went into public school for the first time this year because we relocated out of California. And they have that mindset, that entrepreneurial spirit, and they kind of have learned to think outside the box. They're both very creative, like myself and my wife. So it's really cool to watch, and not making any money yet, but hey, we'll see what happens.
It's not about money, right? You're doing it for the right reasons. It's well, right. I noticed that since we talked last time, you have a different background. And we were talking about your son plays baseball, if I'm not mistaken, and we were talking about the Oakland A's and all that. But you guys moved. Why'd you move out of the Oakland area?
Oh man, lots of reasons. You know, let's see. You know, we both are from California. Our whole family's from Northern California. We spent some time down in Southern California, Huntington Beach area. Actually even lived in Torrance back in the day when I was younger, before kids. But you know, California is a beautiful state, a lot of great people. There's also a lot of certain laws and stuff that don't really align with our beliefs and where we're at inside raising a family. You know, economically, it's gotten extremely expensive there. And then just the political landscape is very polarizing, and I'll kind of. I think that's a good way to put it, or to start that off. A lot more opportunity out here. We're in the Boise area now, in Idaho, and a lot of opportunity out here. A lot of free health decisions, which are amazing. And our kids can go to school out here. Different. I mean, I work remote, obviously, so that was an easy decision on that end. But yeah, just we needed a change too. I think it was hard to leave family. But it was really the best decision for our family and for our future.
Awesome. I did Ironman Boise back in the day, as the kids say or whatever. That water was so cold out there. I remember watching the pros start, and they swam out about 30 yards, and about 90% of them turned around and came back in and said, forget it. I'm not doing it today. But that was interesting. They're actually bringing that race back again next year. I'll have to do it again sometime. Yeah, it's beautiful out there. It's peaceful, right?
It is. It does get cold. And you just reminded me, a client of mine he's from the Santa Rosa area. He does Ironmans and triathlons. He actually sent me the link to that and was telling me about, there's one in Boise again. They're bringing it back next year. Yep. So I told him, I said, I've never done one of those, but it's something I've always been interested in. So I'm kind of looking into it. So I might pick your brain a little bit off the podcast or something if I need any tips or advice or anything, if that's cool.
No problem. I mean, it's been interesting to watch people go from addict to Ironman, since I started doing this stuff a long time ago. It's very cool. Yeah. So I want to get into a serious topic, and I wasn't expecting to. That is when you were talking about your family and you're focusing on God and everything, part of the Racing for Recovery mindset is to be in balance. And I made a ton of mistakes. I made a lot of mistakes because my drive to get Racing for Recovery, where I'm thankful to where it is, it cost me a lot. And there was a lot of times where I was gone or doing something because I felt so driven to get Racing for Recovery to where it was that I missed a couple of family things that, looking back, I should have been there at. So how are you successfully managing family first while you're still striving to get everything going with that sober guy?
Oh yeah, that's such a great question. And, I think there's sacrifices from both ends of the spectrum, on that. But I think for me, I try to prioritize family. So it's, I have kind of my 5 core tenets, right? And it's faith, family, fitness, vocation, and finances. And those are kind of the 5 buckets that I've created in order to prioritize stuff. And then I always know, like, if I'm having something that's a tough decision to make, I can kind of go back to those and look, okay, does it fall in one of these 5 buckets? And if it doesn't, then that's an easy no, probably, if I'm struggling with it. But if it does, how do I prioritize it? Like, where does it lie? I think being able, like, I do travel a little bit, still for work. I do have to go back to California back and forth. I'm kind of a dual resident, I guess you could say at this point. But being able to work remote and have time, to kind of flex my schedule and set my schedule is extremely helpful, number one. But I don't ever want to wake up at the end of the day and feel like I missed out, which I know is going to happen. It's inevitable because especially for men as leaders and trying to lead our families and, run businesses and be dads and be husbands, and be good at all of it and try to be the best version of ourselves. There's going to be sacrifices we make on both ends of the spectrum, but I think it's really just about balancing it the best that I can. And then in the moments when I do have those opportunities, like even like my wife and I had this conversation recently about, like my daughter's school is about 15 minutes away. And so her friends, a lot of them live by the school. And so we're constantly driving. We're driving back and forth, taking her to school, taking her to her friend's house, taking her to games, this and that. And it can get a little bit old, and it can get a little bit frustrating at times because it's, can we go here? Can we go there? But I think whatever it is we're dealing with, we have to put it in a perspective and take a look at how we want to remember those moments. So how do I want to, my daughter's going to be driving soon, right? So soon she's not going to need me to be taking her places or my wife. So I have a choice I can make. Do I want to remember this time as complaining and whining and crying about, oh, I got to take you here and take you there, which I feel like that sometimes, right? Or do I want to remember it as spending good quality time in those car rides and those conversations and having that small talk with her and being able to have her open up to me about certain things and teachable moments and just loving on each other and, talking and that kind of stuff. I try to keep that at the forefront in a lot of the things that I do. And I'm definitely not perfect at it, but I want to remember the moments of my life, whether they're work or whether they're with the kids or my wife or, sober guy, whatever it is. Like, I just want to make the most out of each moment. So it's kind of a long-winded answer, I know, but trying to balance everything. And then I think really coming back to trying to be present in all of the moments that I'm in has been something that I continue to learn and grow in. And hopefully I just get better at it as I continue to go. That's the plan, at least.
One thing you said in there, buddy, that you mentioned the S word a couple times, and that was sacrifice. I got asked that the other day when I was running one of our groups. Somebody made a comment about how much I've sacrificed to make Racing for Recovery happen. And I never looked at it as a sacrifice. And I'm interested in how you're going to view this as well. Are you sacrificing or are you investing?
That's a great point and way to frame it up. I think that maybe it's a little bit of both. Okay. Maybe, I think that the investment now, well, let me just back up. Actually, the investment of getting sober back in 2013, that's where this really starts, because I had a choice. I basically, to put it in a nutshell, 17 years of struggling with alcohol in particular and some other stuff too. But I had a choice to make. I was becoming everything that I never wanted to be. We don't wake up as kids one day and say, hey, I think when I'm an adult, I want to have a drinking problem and, not know how to deal with life and not know how to really be a good dad and all that stuff. And, so I had this kind of pivotal moment of like, I had two things happen. I felt God, guiding me and literally, like speaking to me in this feeling type of way that there was something more for my life, number one. And then I also had this gloom and doom feeling that if I didn't change my ways, that something really bad was about to happen. Cause I had escaped, many times real close of different terrible things happening. And so that there was in that time, there was a sacrifice there. It was sacrificing my lifestyle that I thought was me, my whole identity, which in turn, when I look back, I really had no idea who I was. I had no idea about identity. I had none of that. But in my own little world, that was everything. And so when I finally woke up to that, making that decision was a game changer. It was a life changer. And not just for me, but for my family, for my kids, who don't have to ever see that side of me. And now, now they look at it and they're like, hey, like my son, he's 10 and he always tells me all the time, oh, I'm so glad you don't drink, Dad. Like I'm never going to drink, I'm never going to do that, and I'm also not naive enough to think that those, possibilities aren't there for them. They're going to have to make their own choices at the end of the day and peer pressure, all that stuff. But I just pray that they make the right decisions and that I've been a good enough, example for them. But when we talk about, sacrificing and investing, I think that getting sober and changing my life and starting a podcast, starting a business, man, like helping other people, being of service, like them being able to see me act in that, man, that's a huge investment, not just from a business standpoint, but from a family standpoint and a time standpoint. I do spend a lot of time working, but I also spend a lot of time with my kids, and I try to shut it off on the weekends. Occasionally I'll have to do an email or something, but I feel like I have a decent balance. Sometimes they're busier than others, but I think it's a little bit of both. It's a sacrifice, but I would actually like to say that it's probably more of an investment for our family and on a bigger scale, I think. And I think isn't your family involved in your company as well? Like they're very involved, right? I mean, that's so awesome. I hope that happens with me as Sober Guy continues to grow and my kids.
Dude, I so enjoy talking to you. We've been talking for 15, 20 minutes and we've mentioned alcohol once and some other things once, and that's it. And I love that because that to me is sobriety is not talking about all the substances and everything. It's talking about how good it is to not be doing the substances anymore.
Absolutely.
To answer your question, I have 4 awesome kids, and 3 of them work here at Racing for Recovery, and
So
it's a
cool.
trip, man. Yeah, it's very, very cool. When I was, your kids are younger and stuff, and I remember when mine were your kids' age and doing the sports things and hoping, wow, I wonder if some of them are going to work with me someday, and now to have that become a reality, it's awesome,
It's so cool, man.
Yeah.
What a blessing to work with your family, your kids, and then grow together. And I mean, I'm sure it's not all roses and everything every day. It's, some days there's challenges, of course, but man, at the end of the day, that's a pretty great place to be in, I feel like.
I will bring this up, and it sounds like, when your son said to you, Dad, I'm so glad you don't drink. My youngest son, my youngest child, Mason, he's 19, and he started working here about a year and a half or so ago, and he was sitting in groups listening to people, and one day I was running a group, and he was in there, and afterwards he goes, Dad, I really didn't understand how much of an impact Racing for Recovery was making on people. And I'm like,
wow.
as a dad and I don't consider us a business, but whatever it is I'm doing with Racing for Recovery, I felt like I made it. I did what I was supposed to do here. You're in service, but when your kids understand what you're doing, that really was a turning point for me. I felt so grateful that my kids understand all the work that went into what they're now being a part of. It's truly great. I hope you get a taste of that someday.
Yeah, I do too. I think that's the goal, or at least I want that to be an option for them, at some point maybe as they continue on their own paths. But yeah, I'm really just trying to enjoy the time right now because I know it's going to fly by. It already is. And, they're going to be driving and then they're going to be, potentially going, graduating high school, potentially going to college, getting jobs, careers. Like it's going to happen in the blink of an eye. And it's just, this is an important time right now. And I'm glad I'm in a good mind state. I'm glad I'm, sober. And I'm pretty grateful, man. I try to wake up every day and have some of that gratitude, and that kind of helps to keep things going in the right direction.
Well, I want to talk about this. I want to talk about day 1 of sobriety for you. And you can go back to the day before you chose to quit using and whatever it is you were doing. And let's start with that. The day before you quit, what were you searching for that you didn't have? And then on day 1, tell us about what your mindset was to go get what you didn't have the day before you quit.
Yeah, great question. Well, I would say first there was a lot of back and forth for a good couple of years. I knew I wanted to stop, and it slowly kind of progressed. As fast as the alcohol was progressing and the lifestyle was progressing, also progressing at the same time was my need and my want and my desire to stop, if that makes sense.
It does.
So they were kind of parallel with each other, which is kind of weird. And it's funny, and just saying that right now, I don't know if I've ever really thought about it like that, but that makes a lot of sense to me right now. And so it was a lot of back and forth, and I was always trying to do it on my own. I had went to a couple meetings a couple of times with a buddy of mine, Seth, who got sober just about 2 years before I did. And I still wasn't ready though. I was like, oh yeah, this is cool, but I'm not one of these, I'm not like these people. I don't really have that problem. I haven't lost everything. And, is that kind of that mindset. But as time went on, like I said, it continued to progress and continued to get darker. I continued to make bad choices. I was being intoxicated at work. I literally just couldn't stay sober. So if we kind of fast forward to about the last 6 to 12 months, I couldn't stay sober for one day. I used to be able to go, I would drink a couple days a week and then on the weekends. But at this point, I was all in on it. And even when I was telling myself I was tired and I wanted to stop, I couldn't. So, as it led up to it, like I mentioned before, I just had this really bad feeling that something really bad was about to happen. And then I also, was looking at my daughter and my wife, and I wasn't really being a good dad. I wasn't being a good leader. And so I knew that I had to get some help, but I was so scared. I was just like, change. How was I going to live life? Like, we see this today, even this normalcy bias of alcohol. It's everywhere we go. It's the sporting events. It's the parties, the weddings, the funerals, like go down the list of everything. There's alcohol. It's just it's a quote unquote normal part of society, right? That's just what you do. And so I say that because that was my mindset then. That's just what I did. It's all I know. It's what I saw growing up. Family, friends. And so to change that and to stop doing that, it was a whole new perspective. It was a whole new identity shift. A whole new life, really. And I just didn't know how I was going to be able to do that. So by the end of it, though, being tired, exhausted, I finally couldn't hold it in anymore. And I told my wife, what was going on. She knew something was up. And I told my buddy Seth, and he said, well, I think you need to get some help. And yeah, I knew that's what I needed to do. So you asked about like what was going through my mind that day, that day before and then that day after. So the day before, when I just had told Seth and my wife, like I was ready. It's like, I'm over this. I remember too, I remember feeling it like lift off of my shoulders. Like I remember that feeling, and it wasn't a feeling of like, oh my God, everything's going to be great all of a sudden. It was just a feeling of relief that I didn't have to hide anymore. I could come out of the shadow per se, and wow, I don't have to do this anymore. So that was a huge relief there, but I also knew there was a big road ahead. So the next morning I woke up and I was supposed to make a phone call to a treatment center, to figure out what that looked like, getting checked in, insurance stuff, all the kind of mechanics of it all. And all of a sudden that little voice started in my head, like, you don't need to do this. Like, don't be a punk, man. Like you're not as bad as that guy. Like you're going to lose everything. How are you going to pay your bills if you go away? I mean, all those thoughts, really massive amounts of fear really is what it came down to. But that enemy voice was in there just really trying to distract me like it had done so many times before. So I said, I'm going to go on a walk. So I took our dog, went on a walk, and this road is a parkway. It's usually super busy. And there was nobody out there. It was kind of strange. And I remember walking and I was just like kind of tripping in my head. Like, what am I going to do? Am I going to call, or am I just going to go back? Like my wife knows, like I can't really turn back now. And I'm walking, and I should say too, I was raised Catholic. And so we went, like there was religion and then there's a relationship with God. That's a totally different subject. And I always love talking about that, but just know, that for context, like I did have a bit of, God in my life as a kid and catechism and all that stuff. So I was very familiar with Jesus and being connected, but I had lost my way at this point. Right. So I'm walking down this road and I'm like looking, and I see this book like in the middle of the road, and I'm like, what is that? And I'm walking and I get up and it's a Bible, and it's just sitting there, and it's like right there, and it's open. I don't remember what it exactly was open to. And I walked right past it. I kind of looked and I just kept walking. And like within like 5-10 seconds, I just heard, stop, go pick it up. So like I turned around, I went back, and it was just, I still have it till today. It's this old tattered, like torn, I don't know if someone threw it out the window or lost it or what. But I picked it up and I just felt the presence of God. I felt this spiritual like moment. And all I kind of heard and felt was go. Like, I got you. Like, you're going to be okay, but go. Like, I have something more for you. That's how only way I can explain it. And so that's what I did. I picked it up. I walked straight back home and I started making those phone calls, and I was in, getting some help, I think the following day or the day after that, within the first couple of days. And man, I haven't looked back since.
Wow. So, and I'm going to come back to this, but the second part of that question, on the first day of your sobriety, you mentioned having relief when you quit. So did the relief and maybe, I don't know, motivation, drive, what was taking that relief into the first day of sobriety like for you on a mindset wise?
So let me just make sure I understand the question. So the relief that I felt, like when I explained like the feeling of like, it's just like this big weight off my shoulders.
Yep.
Are you asking if I felt that on that first day still, or what did that look like? Or
I'll say what it was like for me real quickly.
Okay.
The day that I quit, I got arrested for my third DUI. And I was in a complete blackout. I don't remember getting arrested, but I do remember being at home after being let out and continuing to drink. I was listening to Bon Jovi's song, Bed of Roses, living with my grandma.
Yeah.
And my grandma knew that when I was playing that song that things weren't good, but I was drinking a beer. It was either a Moosehead or a Heineken because I considered myself a bougie drunk back at that point. But I remember putting the beer down, and I knew two things. I knew I was done, and I knew I was going to do something instantly. And that's what I'm kind of looking for you. Were you even cognizant of what was going to start coming on day one? Or were you anticipating the goodness that was coming after you had the relief?
Yeah. Okay. I got you now. And that's a great question. And I think there was still a lot of fear. But once I had that spiritual moment with God in the Bible in the street right there, I knew something clicked right there. Something changed. Yes, there was still a ton of fear. I had never been to rehab before. I didn't want to go to rehab, but I knew that I had to make, some sort of drastic change because I couldn't do it on my own. So when I got, back home and started making those calls, yes, I still felt the relief. I still felt the weight lifted, but I also did feel a lot of fear in what was ahead. But it wasn't the fear of impending doom like I was feeling before, if that makes sense. Like the fear I was feeling before was a lot different than the fear I was feeling moving ahead sober. I did have a moment when I got to rehab. The first night you're in a room with I was in there with 5 other dudes who I didn't know, who were all intoxicated because you're in a detox room. Even though I was actually sober when I went in because I quit 2 days before I went in. But a lot of the dudes I was in there with were coming in highly intoxicated, drunk on heroin. It was a weird situation, something I'd never experienced before. But I remember the first night trying to go take a shower and, stripping down and being butt ass naked in this little bathroom and just curling up in a ball and just crying. How did I get here? And when I looked back on this, God stripped me of everything and he took everything. And in that moment is when I started to be reshaped, I guess, and reborn again in a sense and brought back, to today where I'm at. And that's a whole process in itself, and it will continue to be. But yeah, there was definitely that moment. And then when I was in treatment, man, I soaked it up. I was one of the ones who, I wasn't playing around. I was in it. I was in every meeting. I was very conscious. I was soaking everything in because I wanted it that bad. And I knew that there was something bigger for my life, and I was going to find what the heck it was.
I love it, dude. And there's a common thread of people that not only put it down, but they're generally living a good life and they're happy. They're not, I don't want to use cliches, but a dry drunk or whatever. I mean, you can hear it in your voice. You're like, I'm done. This is over. Yeah, I got some work to do here and it's a little bit scary or whatever, but by God, I'm going to do it. And you were willing to listen to other people and apply that knowledge. And that's what it takes, right?
Yep, 100%.
I mean, right?
Full commitment, full send, man. You got to send it, bro.
I love
100%.
that. Yep. So you had.
And I'll say this too. Oh, I just want to say, I say this on the podcast all the time, so I'd love to say it here too. But I've still yet to meet anybody who has said, my habitual drinking habits have really improved my life. So there's that concept there. Like, excuse me, I don't drink poison. I'm sorry. I choose not to do that. And it never did anything for me. It never did anything for the people that I love. I've never, seen it have positive long-term effects for anybody. So why do it?
Well, we'll switch gears a little bit into talking about the recovery process. And I went to AA because that's what you did back when I quit, and I loved it. And I always equate it to I'm like, man, this is a good piece of pizza, but I want the whole pizza and I want to own the franchise. My mind is like thinking bigger. But the point that I'm making here is I wanted to know what was wrong with me. Other than saying, well, Todd, you're powerless over alcohol. I'm like, yeah, no kidding. That's pretty evident. But why? What's wrong with me on an emotional level? And that comes back to, I'm a big believer personally in what I've seen here at Racing for Recovery for 23 years is people have gone through some traumatic things. Now, I also know some people have gone through some traumatic things that never smoked crack to deal with it, but... right. There's a common theme with people that are abusing themselves, whether it's with food or gambling or cutting or drugs or whatever, that they're hurting emotionally. And until we really can get an understanding of the impact of that trauma, you can quit drinking, but can you fully live without even healing from what was leading to the drinking in the first place? What do you think of that?
Oh man, it's great. And it's really tough, when we're stuck in that, that space. And I've been referring to it lately, and it's not like I coined this term or anything, but the art of escapism. So why are we escaping? Like, what are we running from? What are we trying to escape? Why can't we be present? Why can't we be in the moment? Why can't we feel? That's one thing that I still really struggle with. I've gotten a lot better at it, but feeling. So whether it's, sad, even excitement, sometimes, like I have to allow myself to be happy. Sometimes I have to remind myself, and, there was definitely trauma in my childhood, as there is in a lot of people's. We have, different experiences growing up, and, different families and things that happen. And, I became a runner at a really early age, 13, 14, 15. I mean, I was already kind of out of the house. I slept back home sometimes, but it was always on a couch. My parents were back and forth, moving out, different apartments. So, and I just tried to stay with friends, and, I didn't feel like I had a stable, experience at that time, especially as I started to get older. And so I learned to run really early. And then I found punk rock, and I found music, and I found hardcore shows. And, I started being in bands and, playing guitar. And, that kind of led me down this path of, it was an outlet for me, which I really, really enjoyed. But, as well as I do, I know you're a big music guy as well. Like, that whole lifestyle, at least that was pushed on us from a media perspective and what we were shown, MTV and everything is like, man, you had to party and you had to be crazy and you had to like do drugs and drink. And so I was really a victim of that media. I'll call it media coercion in a sense. And it still goes on today. But the funny thing is I know a lot of musicians who work in the music business and are professional musicians, and a lot of them are sober now. There are a lot of them because they realize the same thing that you and I realized at some point, is that it's not a sustainable lifestyle. It's not real, but I know I kind of went off on a thing there with that, but What was the original question you asked me? Shoot, I totally forgot now.
I love
Sorry,
talking
man.
to you again, man.
Yeah.
I've said that like 3 times, but
Yeah.
I was talking about the trauma, the impact of trauma.
Oh,
and you're
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Like you even think of, and I'm going to get to the athletic piece in a second. My coping skills as a kid were music and sports. So I hear you in the whole addiction thing. You know, we're influenced by whatever musically in a negative way. That obviously can change being influenced in a positive direction in sobriety. But yeah, music and sports as coping skills are huge. And I hear you doing the same thing. So what is music like for you today in recovery, and how are you using it productively?
Yeah, it's great. I really enjoy it. It took a minute, you know, when I went to rehab, I kind of stopped my aspirations to be a professional musician. That's kind of where I was at that time. I was doing construction on, you know, as a main job, and then trying to do shows and play and all that stuff. When I went though and got sober, it completely changed the dynamic in my love for music in a sense, because I associated it with getting high and drinking and partying. And so I just didn't feel like creatively connected anymore. And it was really, really tough. And so I kind of quit for a few years, actually. I don't even think I picked the guitar up for a couple of years into my first years of sobriety. You know, and eventually I'd kind of get it here and there, but I wasn't like trying to write or anything like that. But today, oh man, it's great. Like I can see I have a Taylor Big Baby acoustic sitting right in here. And it's just, I love strumming on that thing. I'll pick it up, you know, for 10, 15 minutes here and there. I'm usually waiting on my kids or my wife to get ready to go wherever we're going. So I'll come sit down and play a little bit. And I just enjoy playing cover songs and old country songs and old punk rock songs. And I even did try to write a little bit in the last year or so, just here and there, nothing too crazy. But music has just been such a huge part of my life. Even as a kid, I mean, I remember the first concert my parents took me to was Heart, and I must have been 5 or 6 years old. And I just remember going, man, I want to do that. Like, I want to, oh man, it's so like always that performance art perspective. And, you know, that carried over definitely as I got older. And that's kind of what led me into podcasting too, because I had a background in production and producing our own music and performing and speaking and singing and all that. And so it's kind of funny how God kind of did that, like took me out of music, where I felt like for the first year really, really sad actually, because I felt like my creative outlet was gone and I didn't know who I was and what I was going to do. And then slowly got pushed into podcasting, which helped refill that void into something completely new. And so I think that has a lot of the, you know, the reason why I continue to do the podcast and be of service and talk to different people. And I really enjoy doing it from a creative perspective versus just like even the service and all that is one thing, but as an artist, it's just so much fun.
Yeah. It's like an artist that loved to paint, and then in his addiction, he loved to paint. And then all of a sudden discovering, you know, music in recovery. It's still art. It's just a different form of art, right?
Different vehicle. Yeah,
that's right. Let's talk about physical fitness. You're into it. What do you do? And how is it helping you spiritually, emotionally, mentally?
Yeah. It's really grown on me in the last few years, especially because I wasted. You know, I was always an athlete. You know, I know we had talked about this before. Being an athletic guy, and I played baseball growing up. I think my first words were bat and ball. So at least that's what my parents tell me. So, I mean, I always played baseball growing up, high school, all that. And then when I got into my 20s, I got hurt and I stopped playing. And that's really when I went further into music. And I just kind of gave up, like physically, I think, because I was partying. I was like skinny fat, you know, I just like wasn't in any shape at all. And I really wasted, you know, my 20s and into my early 30s before I got sober. And it's funny, I'm 43 now, and I'm probably in the best shape I've ever been in my life, which is awesome. And the physical part about it is one thing, but I think it's probably, it's just a piece of the pie, I guess. It's more the mental focus, the mental stability, the emotional outlet, I guess, to go lift some heavy stuff and challenge myself. You know, that's a huge, huge part of it. And I understand it's hard to get to the gym sometimes. My buddy Phil, he told me one time, he goes, you know, the hardest machine at the gym is the front door. And I'm like, yep, you're right. Cause it's so hard just to get there. But if you can just get there and you can do it consistently, eventually it stops becoming, I go to the gym, and it becomes a lifestyle. And then you can't go 2 days, 3 days without going to the gym, because it's not about going to the gym. It's about like filling up self and mental, physical, all of it, man. Go ahead. You were going to say something I want to hear.
No, I'm just laughing because I was going to sarcastically say, I have no idea what you're talking about right now.
Yeah, no, not at all. To the guy who does triathlons, like, right. Come on. So
I
crazy.
I love that thing. The hardest weight is going through the front door, or however you said that. That's powerful. Yeah. And it's true. And you even mentioned consistency. And that's another thing in sobriety. It's like, yeah, you can get 30, 60, 90 and collect a couple of coins or whatever, which is great. But it's the consistency in anything that people are doing that's going to pay off. It's a never-ending journey of self-betterment. You don't get a lifetime achievement award for doing something for 6 months. You know, exactly. 6 months of doing it gives you an opportunity to do it for another 6 months.
And chipping away. And no, it's so true. And I think the kind of the society and culture we live in today, it's that immediate gratification, especially with like the short videos and all that. I think I saw a meme the other day, and it said, it's something like, progress isn't made, you know, by doing it a couple times. It's made by doing it consistently, because that's when the change happens, you know? So it has to be, I have like I have a couple little sayings, but one of them is just show up. It's 3 words. I had it on my old office, just show up, because I've noticed that whenever I just show up and I let go of expectations, doesn't mean I can't have a plan or anything going in, but I just got to show up to whatever it is, the gym, a meeting, work, you know, for my kids, whatever it is. Even if I don't feel like doing it, God will work in that, and he'll work it out somehow. I don't really get it sometimes, but when I follow that philosophy, I know things get better, if that makes sense. Like, I know they improve over a long period of time. It doesn't mean I might not have a bad day or a challenging day or something goes wrong. But if I just quit because something went wrong, well, I mean, I'm done. Then I'm never going to make any progress. We have to keep going and just try to be consistent in all things. And it's tough. It's tough some days for sure. But I mean, look, how do you, like, when did you do your first Ironman?
I did my
first. Did you say 23 years ago?
No, it's been 26, I think. I did my first November 6th of 1999.
Wow.
So
I imagine you didn't train for a month for that and go do it. You probably trained for a long time, and you had to show up, and you were sore, and you hurt some days, and you didn't want to go. Like, man, it's not easy, you know?
Well, you know, you're bringing up some other, of course, when you get into a conversation like this, and I never have a plan. I just wing them as I'm going.
Love it. Me too.
I go back to when you were first talking about going into treatment, and you went at it all guns a-blazing, and you listened to people. And again, some of the mistakes that I made.
Yeah.
I was 6 years sober when I got into Ironman, and I jumped into it with both feet. I had no idea what I was doing. I got injured because I went out and ran 17 miles, I think, on one of my first training runs, tore the meniscus in my knee. So of course I had to train on a banged up knee, getting cortisone injections, just not brutal. Smart ways of doing it. And I was able to finish my first one, which was great. But I thought, man, I made a ton of mistakes doing this. And it's related to sobriety. If you want anything, you want to be a good Ironman, you want to be a good parent, you want to be a follower of God or whatever, you probably ought to listen to people who have been doing what you're trying to do and listen to them, ask a lot of questions, and then go out and do what they suggest. And that doesn't mean you have to do it exactly what they're saying, but when we just go, you know, I don't want to say balls to the wind, but I guess I just said that, right? Balls to the wall. You're gonna have some problems. And when I'm talking about some of the stuff I've been fortunate enough to do, I like to focus on the mistakes that I made and help people avoid the mistakes so they can have a better success than what I did. And again, all this stuff is parallel to being sober as well.
Totally. Yeah. It runs, it's all a lot of the same concepts, and like, if we can save people time and effort and, challenges, hurting, money, all those things, if we can save people, from some of the mistakes we made, I mean, that's a huge win right there. And I love being able to do that. Just like you're saying, like, hey, here's what I did. Don't do that.
Right, exactly.
I mean, just to put it blunt. Yeah. And then, by the way, but here's like, 2 or 3 things that worked really well for me. And they might work for you, check it out. Maybe take one of them and then form your own kind of recipe to it or whatever, So I love coaching people in that aspect. I'm like, my goal is not like, when I'm coaching or working with other dudes, like, my goal is not to tell them what to do and to make them do it. That's never going to work. Yeah. My goal is to help guide them and get them to believe that they can do it themselves. That's it. Like 100%. That's what works. Nobody wants to be told what to do, period.
So let's talk about that. What are you doing with your podcast, with your groups and stuff? Talk about how why you started it. What are the struggles with it, and give us some successes with it as well.
Yeah, sure. So I already mentioned kind of the music and the transition from music into podcasting. So that kind of evolved as in, let's see, how do I put this short and sweet? I was commuting really, really long days about 6 months into my sobriety, a little Chevy S10, no AC in the middle of August. It was a stick shift. It was super hot. And I was driving like 4 hours a day, and I was really trying to stay sober. And I was going to my meetings, and I was staying connected. But like I mentioned earlier, I had a loss, and I was really mourning that music and that creative outlet, right? And a friend of mine, my good buddy Justin Moak, he goes, "Hey Ramer, you should check out this podcast. It's called The New Man by this guy Trip Lanier." And I'm like, first of all, what the heck is a podcast? I didn't really know what it was. This was 2014. And secondly, I'm like, well, how do I do that? So I figured it out. I figured out how to listen to it and plug it into like the tape, how to like a tape cassette or whatever. I started listening to Trip on, from The New Man, and something changed. And he's a great dude. It's funny. I started listening to him as, a listener, a supporter, part of his audience. And then we became friends over the years. And like, now we talk and stuff, and he's been on the show and vice versa, that's a really cool part of this whole thing too. But when I was staying busy doing that and listening and starting to become motivated and starting to figure out, and I don't really remember exactly how it took shape, but I do remember I woke up in the middle of the night or right when we were going to bed with my wife one night, and I was like, babe, I'm going to start a podcast. And I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to share. I'm so tired of hiding all my stuff. No, we don't talk about it in the rooms because it's, there's rules. And I don't really like doing that. I want to talk about it. I want to help people, And so for about a month, I just researched like how to start a podcast. And back then, man, I didn't have Rodecaster Pros and cool equipment and stuff. It was like a hodgepodge of stuff. And figured out a name. And then, I just kind of threw it together. And I want to share this with those listening out there too, because this is important in whatever it is that you're trying to do, or you have a dream to do or a vision to do. It's never going to be perfect. It's never going to be exactly how you want it. And if you sit back and wait for exactly how you want it, you're never going to do it. If I wouldn't have done it in that moment and let the fear go and just say, okay, God, like I'm just rolling with it. I don't even know where this is going to go. I never would have done it because it wasn't perfect. It wasn't really good, to be honest. Like I didn't know what I was doing, and started interviewing people and sharing a little bit of my story, and, boom, here we are, over 10 years later. And the most important thing is I still love to do it. Like for me, like I really do. We've interviewed over 500, over 500 different episodes, hundreds of, expert guests and just great people, millions of downloads. We have our Sober Guy men's community. I do one-on-one coaching, do group coaching. We used to do, but pre-COVID, man, I really want to get into doing this again. I'm not a good logistics guy and like, all that stuff, But I used to do a lot of live conferences and live shows, like live podcasts and, live Q&A and speaking and stuff. And that was so much fun. And then COVID kind of shut that down. So, that's something that's on my radar, I guess, as we kind of move forward with this. But, I really do enjoy doing it. It's been a blessing that, I've been entrusted with this platform, and it's helping a lot of people, and I know it's helping me. So that's, it's a good purpose and a good cause for sure.
It's talking to you when there's certain times when I've asked you a question and you started talking, I'm like, I could finish his sentence right now. You know what I mean? And I'm sure you can do that for me too, right? Yep, because it's a mindset. That's a lot of what we're talking about here. Do you have a positive, healthy mindset? How many people, unfortunately, are going to, at the end of their life, they're going to sit there and go, I wish I would have, I could have. And I'm like, you talk about fear. That's a fear. Scary. I was like, I never want to do that. I want to go out going, I gave it everything I had and did my best, and that was it. But if you're right, if you sit and you plan and I got to wait till this happens, whatever, you're going to be sitting there a long time just talking about the same stuff,
Well, I love that too, because it's a trick in there. That's a mindset trick right there. What you just said, Todd, is like, and I think I mentioned it earlier too, in a different context, like, how do you want to remember this moment? Yep. And so when I'm feeling pain, when I'm hurting, whether it's physical or emotional or whatever, or I'm angry, I get pissed off sometimes, and I really have to try to curb that and be able to breathe through it and stop and pause and take a breath and like control it. It's really hard to do if you don't practice it. Yeah. So it's not about perfection. It's just about practicing it. And that little trick there has helped a lot. Like, how do I want to remember this? When I'm on my deathbed one day, or when I'm, in that time at the end of my life, I don't want to have regrets. I know I'm going to have regrets. It's inevitable, but I want to have the least amount possible.
I love it, dude. Is there anything else you want to say? I mean, we've covered everything that. Yeah. I want to say this when I'm asking this question. We've talked about a balanced, holistic lifestyle. You talked about God. You talked about family. You talked about music, talking about work. You're talking about finding your life's purpose and doing it in service to others. Is there anything else you want to add to what you've been awesomely saying?
Well, I mean, I guess I just really appreciate you, man. I love the work that you do. You and your family, and just being somebody who is a role model, and even no matter what point you're at in your life, still hustling and making good decisions in the fact of health-wise, physical, mental, spiritual, all that. And I admire you, man, and I appreciate what you're doing. And just thanks so much for having me on the podcast today. I was really looking forward to it.
You're welcome, dude. Yeah.
Yeah. So that, and then, man, I guess just, gosh, there's a lot of things, but I feel like this may be important. Someone needs to hear this today. And I mentioned it earlier. There's a big difference between religion and a relationship with God. And I feel like a lot of guys, they get caught in that. Maybe they had a bad experience in church growing up, or maybe, their parents forced them to go to church, or, there's all kinds of different reasons why. But I just want to encourage you right now that, it's possible to have a relationship with Jesus, a relationship with God, and have him do something more in your life, without having to adhere to rules and rituals. And, I don't know, I'm not articulating this the way that I thought I would. So let me just leave it like this. Like, God loves you. And man, there's just like I felt a calling on my life. I promise you, I truly believe that God has a calling on every person's life. So if you're struggling with that, just sit in that for a minute, just sit and think, see what that feels like. Listen, there's definitely a personal experience attached to something higher, and it doesn't have to do with religion in a sense. So I hope that makes sense. And I just appreciate you once again, man, having me on today.
No, dude, I love what you just said right there. And I'm sure a lot of other people are going to relate to that. When you were talking about people that have had a bad experience or whatever. It's like, you didn't let one time when you got drunk and you threw up, it didn't stop you from doing it again. Right. So be open-minded with it. I forgot to ask you this. Let's do this. Tell people how they can get a hold of you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, if you go to, thatsoberguy.com, all of our info resources on there, you can follow us at That Sober Guy Podcast. And if I could ask one request, when you go to thatsoberguy.com, sign up for our free Sober Guy Victory Circle men's community. It's a great spot to be a dude and just engage and connect. That's the biggest thing I hear from most guys, is that they've been trying to do it alone for so long, and it's nearly impossible to do it alone. And so you got some great dudes in there, and great ways to connect and hold yourself accountable and all that stuff. So that's it. And also, by the way, shout out to Matt, man. Hey, thanks for setting this up, Matt. And it's so cool that you listened to the podcast back in the day and stuff too. So I just wanted to give Matt a holler there.
Matt's a good dude. I do want to bring this up. You mentioned it earlier. Matt and Abby do all of our stuff, and they're doing a phenomenal job. Abby's a young kid, and then Matt's an old dinosaur like us, right? And when you were talking about, people watching things on social media, Matt and I are like, hey, we want to watch something that's like 45 minutes. And Abby's like, 45 minutes? It needs to be 30 seconds or you're going to lose everybody. And I'm like, what? 30 seconds? You don't know anything, right?
I know.
It's so
Isn't
funny.
It crazy?
Yeah, it's crazy.
Attention spans, man.
It's unbelievable, But it takes all kinds to make the world go around, man.
Yep, agreed. Yeah. Thanks again, man. I appreciate you.
Yeah, good talking to you, brother. I'll see you soon, man.
All right, man. See you, Todd.
Take care.
Later.
Until next time, everybody, that's the Racing for Recovery podcast. Check out my buddy, That Sober Guy. He's awesome.